Brian Godlock is an electrical engineer living a happy life with his wife and their only child, Taylor, in the fictional city of Las Palomas, Texas. However, tragedy strikes when Brian is teaching Taylor how to ride a bike, and a dangerous gang opens fire on them from a passing car. In the chaos, Taylor is fatally shot, leaving Brian heartbroken and seeking revenge. Filled with rage and determination, Brian sets out to track down the dangerous gang. As he follows them, he strategically uses a metal rod to shatter the windshield of one of their cars. The gang then targets Brian, but he cleverly evades them by noticing a lifting car in his path, causing the metal rod to take out the driver of one of their vehicles. The gang leader, a ruthless criminal, steps out of the car and shoots Brian in the back as he tries to escape. Then Playa gets him and shot him on the neck. But fortunately, the bullet misses his vital organs, and Brian's wife rushes him to the hospital in time. After a successful surgery and removing the bullet, Brian survives, but the bullet damages his vocal cords and leaves him unable to speak. As Brian is moved to a different ward post-surgery, Detective Dennis Vassell pays him a visit and leaves his contact information for future communication. Vassell is involved in combating criminal gangs in the city. Once Brian regains consciousness, his caring wife tends to him diligently. Realizing he has lost his ability to speak, Brian struggles emotionally. His wife buys a special device to help Brian communicate, but in frustration he throws it to the ground. Upon returning home after his recovery, Brian is haunted by memories of his lost son, especially during past Christmas celebrations with his son. His emotional suffering grows, and his wife tries her best to lift his spirits, but with little success. Brian, through gestures and nods, pleads to his wife for help, but she is at a loss on how to comfort him. In a poignant moment, they both break down in tears.
If you enjoy our content, please support us by subscribing or liking, so we can recap more films for you.
Everything in that house is a reminder of his son's memories. From the love of his child, even sleeping in his son's bed, he remembers him when hugging his son in the bed. His wife communicates with Brian through the phone and SMS. These circumstances have turned intense for Brian, a father thirsty for revenge for his son, and having lost his ability to speak properly. He himself goes to the police department in their city and tries to gather information on all the gangsters, especially Playa, the gang leader who is responsible for his son's death and his own damaged throat. He takes some photos of the identified criminals at the police department. He then pins all the information and photos on a board and notes down a date on his calendar when he will eliminate them all. A night before Christmas. From learning to handle different weapons to engaging in rigorous physical training, Brian is preparing himself thoroughly. He intends to eliminate all individuals involved in his son's death. He buys a second-hand Mustang car and customizes it to be fully prepared for a battle with the gangsters in every aspect. He practices shooting and later buys several weapons, but his wife is distressed and cries seeing him in these conditions. His wife, who deeply loves Brian, feels that his actions might lead to his death and doesn't want to lose him too. Feeling hopeless and unable to bear the sight, she leaves him alone. Brian, who cares only about revenge, continues training. He uses a doll to practice attacking enemies. He learns professional driving skills with his Mustang, spending months preparing himself. He then tries to monitor the gangsters' headquarters with a specific camera and takes several pictures for better identification. He continues physical training and keeps his research under control, focusing on professional driving and shooting. He is preparing himself to become a professional killer while approaching December, the time of Christmas. Suddenly, Brian comes out of a store and sees a young boy. He is so immersed in his grief over his lost son that he sees this boy resembling his own son and embraces him. He truly loved his son dearly. In the next scene, Brian sees Playa surrounded by some kids thirsty for revenge, ready to approach him with a knife tucked in his pants pocket. Suddenly, other members of Playa intercept him and throw him to the ground. Playa's girlfriend mocks him, pouring something she was eating on him. Continuing on, determined and well-prepared, he plans to eliminate everyone, including Playa, before the start of Christmas 2022. Finally, the time for the attack arrives. He breaks into Playa's first target, Anthony Borello, attacking him from behind and knocking him down the stairs with a punch, rendering him unconscious. Brian then takes him to his hideout, disguised with a welding mask. He handed him a pen and paper with specific questions. However, he mistakenly strikes his own knife on the table. Anthony, a cunning and strong individual, quickly frees himself with the knife, and even manages to strike Brian in the leg with that knife. A fierce struggle ensues between the two, but ultimately, Brian manages to knock him out. He then readies himself, dons protective clothing, and writes a letter to his wife. He observes her from afar as she paints the face of Taylor, then goes to their child's grave. It's December 24th, the first year since his child passed away, and he has brought a gift, likely Taylor's favorite toy. How poignant. Brian had the address of Detective Vassell's house and rang the doorbell and left Anthony Barleo's unconscious body along with a Christmas card. When the police took Anthony away, he opens the Christmas card, finding a USB flash drive inside, with a note of Brian quotes, "The job you were supposed to do is now done by me, and tonight, everything will end." When Detective Vassell examines the flash drive on his laptop, he discovers a wealth of information about this dangerous gang he had gathered. Even Anthony's confession and the gang's location marked on a map with pictures. Brian, on his way to gangs of Playa, encounters a man that works for Playa engaging in violence and tormenting people. He hits the man with his car, shattering his bones. Then while pinned against the wall, he wounds him with a knife. Brian then with a gun and shots him on the roof car and takes him down, then cuts off his fingers and throws them towards Playa's residence. One of the Playa's men picks it and hands it over to Playa, who identifies and gets angry. As he approaches Playa's residence, he witnesses a gang war with several cops killed or injured. He tries to help a female cop, but tragically she loses her life. Later, he attacks one of the gang members with his car, runs him over, and takes his phone. While shooting at him, he films the scene and sends it to Playa. Playa shares the location of the video sender with all his men in orders to kill him. Just as Brian is sitting in his car and thinking, a group of Playa's men attack him with both motorcycles and cars. In an exhilarating chase, surrounded by two cars, he manages to make their forces collide and crash. Ultimately, his professional driving skills come in handy. Continuing the story, Dennis was getting closer to the Playa's gang using the map addresses previously sent by Brian. We see a scene where a Playa preparing to inject drugs for his addicted girlfriend. Meanwhile, Brian, waiting for the next update from the Playa's members through a phone he snatched earlier, and prepares himself. Due to his car being damaged in a previous altercation with a motorcycle, he launches an attack towards the gang members. Just as the garage door is closing, he manages to enter and throw his bike in their direction. Suddenly, he saw that gasoline was leaking from that bike. In the heat of the moment, in a clash with the Playa forces, Brian shoots towards the bike and takes off into the air, and a lot of members of Playa's gang deads. Brian continues on his path of vengeance, destroying anyone who crosses his way, even setting up booby traps along his route towards the Playa gang. All this happens while Playa and his girlfriend are happily dancing and getting high on drugs. In the next scene, one of the Playa's member, he had a close call in a car accident and apparently has 9 lives, gets into an intense confrontation with Brian. However, Brian successfully brings him down with a beautiful shot to the head. Subsequently, Detective Vassell enters the area and eliminates several gangs. Suddenly, as he walks, he comes face to face with Brian, both pointing guns at each other. Quickly realizing they need to unite against Playa. At this very moment, Playa's girlfriend arrives and starts shooting at both of them with some sort of automatic gun, like Uzi. Brian ambushes from behind, he points the gun at her, and surrenders Playa's girlfriend. However, Playa's girlfriend suddenly pulls out a small gun from her clothing and shoots Detective Vassell and Brian several times, leaving them both wounded. Nevertheless, Brian manages to shoot back and, to ensure her elimination, he fires a bullet into her head. In a critical moment, injured Brian somehow makes his way to Playa's hideout, that decorated for Christmas in advance. Playa arrives and shoots numerous bullets at Brian with his 2 guns, overwhelming even for Brian's bulletproof vest. Despite the intense gunfire, Brian refuses to give up and surrender. Just as Playa is about to deliver the final shot to Brian, Detective Vassell, from behind, shoots Playa, allowing Brian to take his revenge. Brian successfully subdues Playa with his bare hands, and in the final moment, both Brian and Detective Vassell, drenched in blood, lie down together. In the last moments of his life, Brian envisions his son, depicting him from childhood to adulthood. As the scene closes, Saya, Brian's wife, finds a letter left by Brian at their son's grave earlier. In the letter, Brian apologizes to Saya, expressing his inability to bear the circumstances after Taylor's death and his desire to avenge their son. He urges Saya to forgive him and reminds her that upon reading the letter, she will either find him dead or never see him again. The film ends with a shot of a toy train that Brian bought for their deceased son, moving around his grave.
Thanks for watching to the end. Folks, if you enjoy this content, make sure to like us, subscribe, and share us to your beloved ones.